I thought I'd take this opportunity, since there's some free time, to tell you a little bit about some surveys I've just completed back in, well, before 2013. I've been coming to events like this for a long time and hearing people say, oh yeah, open source should definitely be used in the NHS, and here are a stack of reasons why it's not being used. But it all seemed to be fairly conjectural, and I wasn't seeing much evidence of people saying it's because people are risk averse that they don't use open source, or it's because they don't believe that the total cost of ownership is lower, or it's because whatever. So I thought I'd do a survey to find out what people's real views on the adoption of open source in the NHS was. And I ran that in the summer of 2013. I got some results, and then I started working on the NHS England open source programme and realised that I was busily undermining the results I'd just collected and still hadn't written up. So I thought I'd rerun the survey in 2014. I've just done that and finally written up the results, and I thought I'd just share a few of the sort of key findings from that. Interestingly, one of my hypotheses was that the uptake, the people's enthusiasm to respond to the survey would dramatically increase between 2013 and 2014, because there have been so many events and so much in the news and in the HI and so on and so forth. That turned out to be completely wrong. I had 134 responses in 2013 and I got 51 responses in 2014. Ironically, I had more tweets asking people to fill in the survey than I actually had responses to the survey. So I kind of put that down to something that I've called FOSS fatigue, but actually my impression that what might encourage people to complete the survey had in fact probably had the other opposite effect, and everybody thought, oh, either someone else will be doing this, so I don't need to, or geez, I just hear about nothing but FOSS, the free open source software these days, so I can't be bothered. So that was a surprise finding. The other surprise finding was the survey was basically made up of a sort of set of dimensions that help describe what the sort of respondent was. Do they work for the NHS? Are they in a decision-making position regarding procurement? Have they got experience of using software, FOSS software, in their organisation or personally, and other things like that. And then a number of questions that asked in terms of things like quality of the software, functionality of the software, ability to change the software, availability of support, both paid and community, so a range of dimensions like that. Got them to answer the question, I strongly prefer commercial off-the-shelf software, I marginally prefer commercial off-the-shelf software, I'm neutral, I marginally prefer free open source software, I strongly prefer free open source software. So sort of standard Likert type scale response. And got the results in, did the analysis, and there is no evidence that there are what you might call unwarranted skews in those data one way or the other. Nearly all the responses were a normal distribution, so I'd been expecting to see kind of bimodal, where you had a peak, so people either tended to prefer COTS or they preferred FOSS. Didn't see that. For all the questions, they were pretty normal distributions with actually relatively small skews. So, for example, the feature of the ability to change the software, free open source software had the highest skew in that dimension, but it was still only like half a point away from the I'm neutral, and the availability of paid support was the one which had the strongest skew towards the commercial off-the-shelf software, and that was, again, not much more than a half a point away from the neutral. So I then thought, well, I can maybe see if there's something to do with the attitudes towards risk of people and their preference for particular software licensing models. So I had two ways of assessing risk. One was about the personal attitude towards risk, and I used a question that established the proxy of how far would you go out of your way to cross the road using a zebra crossing, as a kind of estimate of how personally risk averse or otherwise they were. And for the professional attitude to risk, I used a question, would your colleagues describe you as more inclined to implement a product quickly or certainly? And then I plotted those against the preference overall. So there were, at the end of the survey, there was a, having answered all these questions about the various dimensions, overall, on balance, I prefer free open source software to commercial software. And what had my hypothesis been correct, that there was a correlation between attitude to risk and the preference for software type, I would have expected to see congregations of data in the corners of the spectrum. So were it to be the case that riskier people preferred FOSS, for example, you'd have seen clusters there and clusters there. And again, didn't see any of that. Saw all the data grouping in the middle. They were mostly neutral about, so they had a kind of an average preference for risk on average, which, you know, clearly, and they were neither pro nor anti-commercial off-the-shelf software. So from the point of view of establishing, do the people who make decisions about procurement of software have what you might call unwarranted fear, uncertainty, and doubt around software? Those people who responded to the survey didn't exhibit those characteristics. Now, of course, we have the whole issue of self-selection of the people who complete the survey, but it's some data, and we don't have other data to go on. So for the time being, why extrapolate from ANEC data when we've got some real data to work with? The one thing that did come through strongly, though, and it was, I'm pleased to say, well, that one hypothesis that held some water in the analysis, was that the primary reason why FOSS software is not implemented is because it's not available in the procurement process. So depending on how you analyse it, somewhere between 50 and 75% of the respondents to the survey said they saw FOSS alternatives in their procurement fewer than 20% of the opportunities they had. So, in a nutshell, we have got some data about attitudes to FOSS in the NHS. It isn't skewed horribly, where we can go out with massive education programs to say, guys, don't worry about this, because they aren't worried about things like, is it less secure, is it more risky, is the total cost of ownership unsustainable? But what we do need to do, if we want to increase the uptake, is find ways of making it more widely offered as part of the procurement process. And I think that there's a number of things that are happening which converge on that message. Things like the NHS England Open Source Programme, things like the government procurement toolkit, which now makes it explicit. So I'm hoping that these various initiatives will encourage the opportunity for people to select the software, and I think we can be fairly confident that, again, based on the responses I've had to the survey, that the people making the decisions are not shying away from adopting free open source software because of unwarranted views. Thank you very much.